Hey everybody, welcome back to Stop.Sit.Surrogate with Kennedy and Ellen. We have a really fun, cool, exciting scientific guest today. I'm so excited about this.
Scientific.
So we're going to let her introduce herself. Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Alease. I'm an embryologist. I'm super excited to be here. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on this.
Oh,
No,
Yeah,
so
I'm just kidding. I'm totally just
I
kidding.
love it.
Like, for those who
No.
are listening, I'm here.
Well, I
not
was telling Elise that
so.
before we started, there were people that reached out saying, "Hey, can you talk to an embryologist? We love her." And so I was like, "Oh my gosh," and she agreed to come on. So no pressure.
And talk about pressure as not as much pressure as on these poor surrogates as uteruses, right? Like, so it's in the same.
Oh,
I know,
absolutely.
right?
Or like embryo, just
I
pressure all around this whole
everywhere.
field. So
Yeah.
Just a pressure-filled industry.
All right. So I looked at your website, like I kind of investigated, looked around and stuff. I am so fascinated by you because you tell us how you got into, well, first of all, let's talk about what an embryologist is, and then if you can tell us how you got there.
So, as embryologists, we are the ones who are behind the scenes creating embryos. We do the culture, we freeze them, we thaw them. We're the ones who are looking for eggs during an egg retrieval. We're the ones kind of behind the scenes who are, we like to say, making the magic happen, but
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of people know who we are.
And the
No.
embryologist isn't the one who literally takes that tube. That's the infertility doctor, right? Who takes the tube with the embryos in it and implants and puts that inside the
It
patient.
depends. So, we
Okay.
load those little tubes. I actually have one. Let me
Ooh,
go get it.
okay.
If you're listening, you need to watch.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I have lots of training material here in my office. But
Wow.
yeah, this is the embryo transfer catheter.
Yes, it
So
is.
yeah, and so then we, it gets put on a syringe, but we load this in the lab. So we'll be under the microscope and we kind of suck it up in there. And then depending on the lab, it depends, how they like to do it. Some physicians, we bring this to the physician and they take it from there.
Okay.
Some practices, they actually have us thread it. So this will already be placed in the uterus, and then we bring just this floppy piece in, and they
Okay.
have us, I usually have two hands to do this, but they have us like put it in there.
Okay.
And sometimes they have us do the plunge. It really depends. It's like a physician preference thing.
Okay. Okay.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, because literally what's going through my head right now is this is the first time I ever saw the behind the scenes thing was with my most recent transfer, which was in May,
Hmm.
and it didn't take. But she like it was so weird because you know how like you're handed food through like a door or something like that's how this transaction was going on. I
Yeah,
was like,
sometimes it's like that. We're just like, here you go.
yeah, and
Yeah.
but she was like, she was so nice. She's like, okay, so like this little flimsy thing's gonna go in you. I'm like, oh, it's fourth time doing this. First time education. Love it. So wild because that little embryo is
Yeah.
so freaking tiny. I mean, it looks big because it was like on the screen, but I
Yeah.
knew I was like, that's the tube. How? Like it didn't make
Yeah.
any sense.
And so when the physician puts the catheter in, they have this, there's a little metal piece at
Yeah.
the top of this. I'm gonna do like the old school makeup,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, there
Okay.
is. Okay.
There's a little metal tip and they can see that on ultrasound. So that's how they know where the end of the catheter is. And
Gotcha.
then we fill this, it's not just the embryo because there's no way it can be just the embryo. It's got
Right.
media in there as well. So on the ultrasound, you can see the media. So they'll say, oh, you see a little flash or you'll see a little bright light.
Yeah.
That you can't actually see the embryo because it's so tiny, but you can
Yeah.
see that little bit of media.
Okay.
And that is a good thing. We want to see the little bit of media. And then we take the catheter back and
Mhm.
then we like flush it, make sure it didn't get stuck in there.
Got it.
But yeah, that's the
So
whole
what is this media? Like, is it kind of like a
Media.
water? Is it like water based?
it is it's a mix of things. So there is water in it, but it's proteins, antibiotics, sugars that provides nutrients for the embryo.
Mhm.
Very fascinating. This is so fun.
Yeah, we just got started. We can just keep
I know,
going.
right?
Wow. Okay, so then how did you get involved in
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
my background is in genetics. I went to NC State, go
Yep.
Pack,
Woohoo.
and did an undergrad in genetics and a minor in biotechnology. I always had an interest in the lab and reproductive like medicine and health. And I knew I didn't want to go to med school or PA school or graduate. I was like done with school. And I'm like, what can I do now? And so I literally Googled, what can I do with a genetics degree, research, like reproductive, and like tried to find something that fit what I liked. And I found embryology. And I was like, I think this is going to be it. I think this is it. I had there's not really a lot of information on how to get into this, like what is needed. Like when you talk about being a doctor, like it's very clear you go to med school, then residency, then fellowship, and it's a whole thing. This is kind of not like that. So I reached out to all of the clinics in my area. We had 5 at the time. And I said, can I come shadow? Can you just tell me what I'm supposed to do? And one of them got back to me. And that was the practice that I shadowed at and interned and then ended up with a full-time position when I graduated. So yeah, and then got
Very
trained on
cool.
the job. So we train on the job.
That's amazing. But you have to have a little bit of sciencey background, right? Okay.
Yeah, so you are required to have any lab that is CAP inspected, which is an optional accreditation, which most labs do have, requires you to have a bachelor's degree in a science, in a hard science. So like biology, chemistry, microbiology, genetics for me, animal science is a really popular one. So it requires you to have that, but other than that, you are just trained, and your lab director, who has a PhD, is the one who says, yes, you are competent in these skills to now work on patient cases. We don't typically train on like patients that are in cycle. Like patients will donate things to QC and to training. And so we train on like discarded material or mouse embryos, things like that. And then kind of work up to working with patient cases.
Golly, super fun. Okay.
I love it.
Right? Oh, I bet you do. Yeah, you're very passionate about it. I would love that too. That would be so cool because you get a little bit of patient interaction, but then you get all the science, like all the you're literally creating life. Like, I mean, seriously, you are. Like,
yeah, it's so rewarding, and I love it's for me, it's a perfect amount of patient interaction. I wanted some, but I knew something like nursing was not a good fit for me. I was like, I'm gonna get burned out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. So I'm assuming you're the person, are you the person who grades embryos then? All right, can you break down a grade?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the ones who give them a grade. So we are grading, most people are getting a grade like 4AB. There's a number and 2 letters.
Okay.
4AB, 5AA, 3BC, something like that. So we're looking at 3 things. Each of those components correlates to something with the embryo. So the number is a number 1 through 6. That correlates with the expansion of the embryo. So embryos are surrounded by something called a zona. The zona is kind of a shell. And as the embryo grows, it pushes out on that shell and eventually leaves that shell, hatches from the shell like a chicken, it hatches, then eventually completely gets rid of it. And your embryo has to do that to implant. So 1 through 4 are embryos just kind of pushing on that shell, and that shell gets thinner and thinner, and the cavity in the middle of the embryo gets bigger and bigger. And then a 5 is an embryo that's hatching, or if you see people who are like, oh my gosh, it's splitting, it's kind of pinched in the middle, it's not splitting, it's actually hatching.
Okay.
Some of the embryos out of the zona, some of it's still in. And then a 6 is fully hatched, so it's left that shell behind. So that's what that number is. And I don't really like to consider that good or bad. It's really more of a way to determine the maturity, although there are some nuances and preferences when it comes to expansion, but it's not typically the most highly important thing when we're grading an embryo.
To transfer an embryo, to just piggyback just a little bit, to transfer an embryo, what number do you want to see 1 through 6? What the
I was
number?
just gonna say, so it 3s are good, 4s are good, 5s are good. Okay. 6s are good for a fresh transfer. There are some concerns when you are freezing a 6, meaning that it's fully hatched, that it's exposed directly to the cryoprotectant media. It has no shell around it to help protect it. So if I have to choose between a day 5 6AA and a day 5 4AA, I'm going to choose a 4AA.
4AA,
There's some research out there that shows slightly lower pregnancy rates for 6s because of that like added risk of cryo damage. So a
Yeah.
lot of times people will choose those last, unless there's one
Okay.
that's like, unless it's the best one out of the group.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
that is the
number.
first, the number.
Okay.
The first letter, it's graded on a letter scale, A, B, C, D. Typically you don't see a D because those are too poor quality to freeze. But that is what correlates to the ICM. That stands for inner cell mass. That's what becomes the baby. So that is the little, sometimes you'll see an embryo and there's like a ball of cells that's like a ball and the rest of it. The
Yeah.
little clump of cells, that's the ICM.
Okay.
That is for most people the more important thing to when they're choosing an embryo for transfer, an embryologist. We're grading that, like I said, A, B, C, where A is good, B is fair, C is poor. We are looking for compacted, so nice and round and plump. Sometimes they can kind of spread out. We want it to see nice and compacted. It can also give off cells. It can kind of release cells if there are damaged cells or there's pieces of DNA that are abnormal. So we don't want to see it kind of giving off dead cells or anything like that. We want to see it nice, compacted, no cell death.
Okay.
And so that's the first letter.
Okay.
The second letter is the trophectoderm. It is also graded A, B, C. It's again the last letter, and that correlates to the trophectoderm of the embryo. That's what becomes the placenta.
Oh, look at
Yeah,
that. We all know that word. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So when we do biopsy, embryo biopsy, PGT testing, genetic testing, that is where we take cells from. That's
Okay.
where we're taking cells from. Yep. And again, A, B, C, A is good, B is fair, C is poor. And we don't, similar to an ICM, we want to see nice coverage. We call it cobblestone. We want to see a nice even cobblestone look. We don't want to see bald spots. We don't want to see a lot of extruded cells.
Okay.
So that's kind of a basic rundown, but then you can put those letters together.
Yeah.
You get an AA, you get a BA,
Yeah.
you get a BB. So SART and the Gardner grading scale, which is the name of this, Gardner is the person who created this scale. Not every clinic follows this. Some people do other stuff. The goal was to create consistency, but most people use this grading system, some don't.
Okay.
So based on their scale, an AA, an AB, technically an AB, are considered good. A lot of times people also put BA in there as well. In the traditional grading scale, BB and BA are considered fair, and that's because the ICM is a B and the trophectoderm is an A. And then poor is considered BC, CB, and anything below. But there's some wiggle room there. Some people consider a BC fair. Like I said, some people consider a BA good. So people make little changes to this scale. But if you go by the books, AA, AB, BA, BB are fair, and then BC. Yeah. So it's kind of
that makes sense.
a little bit.
Okay.
So okay. No, that makes sense because say that funky word with the T.
Trophectoderm.
I'm gonna say that wrong my whole life. Okay, so
we shorten it to TE if you want.
TE. I love that. Oh my. Also, all your guys' acronyms, I can't keep up with. I'm like, what's this one? What's that one?
MVP, all of the ones, HCG, and yeah,
we get HCG. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But okay, so when you guys, you brought up something. You guys do the testing, like the genetic testing and all that kind of stuff, and you're pulling that from the TE.
Yeah.
And good job, Mom. So okay, so when you're testing, what is that test? Can you explain like what you're testing for?
Yeah, so we are removing 5 to 7 cells from the trophectoderm, which will become the placenta, to do PGT testing. PGT stands for pre-implantation genetic testing, and it's often testing for aneuploidy. We can test for different things, but like 90% of patients are doing aneuploidy. And those are chromosomal abnormalities that happen during the growth of the embryo, not abnormalities that are passed from parent to child. So like if I'm a carrier of sickle cell, my husband's a carrier of sickle cell, there's a different test for that than a test for something like Down syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, Turner syndrome, where you're missing a whole chromosome or an addition of a whole chromosome. So that's what we're testing for with that testing, is things like Down syndrome, Klinefelter's, trisomy 18, that sort of thing that would likely have the embryo not implant or would result in a miscarriage, result in a significantly,
Okay.
intense or, trying to think of a better word, defect. Yeah.
Right. So when people say, no, I have to just jump in for a second. So when people say, oh, we've had our embryos tested, like, okay, hold on a second. Yeah, you've had them tested, but you've had the trifectoderm tested. Like they didn't take cells out of those embryos. And I think that's a huge misconception with people
Totally.
who hear that we've had our embryos tested. Technically, you did, but you were biopsying, quote unquote, part of what's going to become the placenta. So that to me, I never knew that. Never knew.
Yeah, so there are a lot of limitations to PGT, and that's you brought up a really great point. So we're testing the placenta. So there are a lot of studies looking into the concordance with the trifectoderm versus the ICM, but we don't want to test the ICM.
Right.
So we don't know yet if that would damage or create a large enough damage to impact implantation. So research on that is ongoing. Currently, what they do is like they'll test the trifectoderm and then they'll do like an amnio or a CVS to see what the concordance is if a patient is pregnant. But yeah, so we can't say for sure that the trifectoderm represents the ICM because in general, the baby has to be very perfect to like be born,
Yeah.
But there are a lot of placental disorders that you can live with and you will still have a healthy baby. So it's we know what we know, and there are some limitations that we're still learning about. But there are a lot of times patients don't always understand that there are limitations to a lot of this that we do. Yeah.
Sure.
Can I ask an interesting question? Because it's kind of been circulating our community a little bit, and it has to do with like autism. Like, is autism able to be tested in this, or like no?
So not with PGTA. There are some companies that will do whole genome sequencing, meaning that they are testing more than just a chromosome. So I actually have lots of little things. So this is from my time at NC State. But this is what a chromosome looks like. So when we're testing for PGT or PGTA, we're looking for like a whole loss or like a whole gain or like a big piece is missing. But there are like millions of base pairs in here. And so we can't test for that. We're looking broad range with PGTA, but with whole genome sequencing, they can look at every single gene.
Okay.
So it's more in depth. It's very expensive.
I was going to say, and that makes the cost rise. Yes.
An embryo.
Yes.
PGT is like $200 an embryo. So it's like 10 times more expensive.
Wow.
But there is some research to show, and this is a much better question for a genetic counselor, so I will only speak to as much as I know. There are some genes that are linked in some way to a risk of autism. I think at this point, there's so many genes that they think are involved, and we don't know for sure that they can give a risk for that. I don't know if they can give a definitive like this embryo is going to have autism. That's the thing. I think it's more of like there are multiple genes involved. We can give like a risk factor. But again, there are a lot of limitations to that too. And if you're interested in that kind of testing, genetic counselor for sure. You want to talk to a genetic counselor.
Because so the difference between an embryologist and a genetic counselor is they're going deeper into the cells and like figuring out like
they are interpreting the report. So they know a lot about the testing. So when we do an embryo biopsy, we're removing the cells and we send it off to a company. We don't do the testing ourselves. We do the biopsy ourselves. So we know all the ins and outs of the testing platform, of the results, how to interpret the results, all of that sort of stuff. So I know, like I said, a very little bit about that. They know it all, and they know how things are passed. They're very knowledgeable. I actually talked to one last week.
Oh, wow.
Own thing. I just carrier screening myself, but whole thing. That's coming out real soon. So you guys are getting a little sneak peek on that.
What's happening? You said something about what? I heard something, but I was like, what?
Yeah, I'm freezing. I'm gonna be freezing my eggs.
Are you? Oh, how exciting!
Yeah,
that is fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna be documenting it, so be on the lookout on my page. But next couple weeks, it'll be in the next couple of weeks.
Oh,
Wow.
how cool too. And you're gonna have all this knowledge and be like,
I
yeah,
know.
I'm
I'm
prepared.
nervous about that though, because I feel like I'm gonna know too much. Like
Yeah.
I
I
don't
understand that.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
knowing too much is actually like
A detriment.
not
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Because then you
Okay.
just
So I have a question. So
okay.
you do the biopsy, you grade all of these embryos, excuse me. How, quote unquote, does the freezing process work? Are there embryos that you just, the grade is not good enough, we are not freezing them, do something else with them? Or can a couple say, we want to use these two or what have you, and we're freezing the rest? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I actually have some visuals for that too.
I
If I
love
can
you.
find
I
it.
love
Yeah,
it.
here. Okay, so the process is now called vitrification.
Oh,
So, and that is because the embryos are not technically frozen like you think of like an ice cube.
yeah.
They are frozen in a glass-like state. So what we do is we put them in concentrated solutions, mostly concentrated with sugar and cryoprotectant, and walk them through a series of solutions, removing as much liquid as we can, replacing that with cryoprotectant, and then flash freezing them in liquid nitrogen. And that is because we want to avoid the formation of ice crystals because ice is pointy and will kill cells. So we really want to avoid any ice. And so if there's liquid in there that's not cryoprotectant, it's going to create ice. So we're trying to remove that and replace it with things that won't create, pokey ice.
Super interesting.
So with that, this is what they're frozen on. It's this little device here. It's called a cryo device. There's a bunch of different kinds. This is a really popular one, which is why I have it. And so it's got a cap on it, and then it's frozen. The embryo is frozen where that little black tip is, right above that black tip.
Okay.
And it's frozen with in a little drop of media, and then we immediately put it in liquid nitrogen.
Is it just one embryo per tube?
Oftentimes, yes. So
Okay.
if patients are doing PGT, we have to freeze them individually because then if we freeze them together, then we don't know which one's normal and which one's normal, right? So we freeze them individually. Oftentimes, even without PGT, we freeze them individually because the standard recommendation for the number of embryos to transfer is 1. So we don't want to thaw 2 if the plan is to transfer 1. So if patients have like 15 embryos, we'll freeze the first 5 or 6 individually, and then we may start by 2 because if you haven't gotten pregnant in that many transfers, the indication is going to go up to recommend 2 embryos.
Right.
So to get to your question, this is like a little backstory.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
To get to your question on freezing, like how do we determine what we're freezing, all of that.
Yeah.
So most labs have a threshold. If an embryo is below a certain quality, so if below a certain grade, will not freeze it because the likelihood of it creating a pregnancy is low. Or for instance, like this is a big one. If there is no ICM, so a lot of times it'll develop a really nice trifectoderm, but there's no ICM in there. So it's just missing. Like there's nothing there. So we won't freeze that because we can't say that there's going to be a baby. So that's an embryo that we would say, it's got a nice trifectoderm, but it like it's a D quality ICM. So we're not going to freeze that.
Okay.
And then that threshold changes per clinic. Some people are a little more strict. Some people are a little bit more lenient. But patients oftentimes don't get to choose how many we freeze. We freeze based on the quality of embryos and how many embryos develop, because not all the eggs that we fertilize will make blastocysts. It's actually very few, like it's about 50% of the eggs that we fertilize will make it to a blastocyst. So
wow. Yeah.
I have a huge question to piggyback off of this. So if you are if you are 36 to like 49 and you're looking to freeze your eggs, because after 36 it's like geriatric pregnancy, right? Or maybe it's 35, something like that, which is the dumbest term, but it's fine. But so when you're looking at an embryo in that bracket versus an embryo that's younger, do you actually see differences in the embryos? You don't.
Oh, so we can't actually, the most we see differences is not necessarily age related. So when we see older patients, they often get less embryos. So it's not embryos look worse. We just don't get as many because the egg quality and the sperm quality is lower, meaning that there's a higher likelihood of a DNA abnormality, like a genetic abnormality in the egg. And so it arrests in development, or in the sperm, because I don't want to say it's just eggs, it's sperm a lot of times too.
Yeah.
It will, the embryo will arrest and not create a blastocyst. But what we do see is a higher rate of aneuploidy. So that genetic testing we do, as patients get older, the rate of abnormalities increases. So there's less normal embryos, less normal eggs, less normal sperm. So we don't have as many normal sperm, but we can't see that. They all look the same.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. I thought they would have looked different, but
yeah, it'd be cool if we could be like, yeah, that one's good, that one's
right.
good. It's a lot of money, but we can't do that yet. And that's where the AI comes in. If you've seen things about AI, they're wanting to use AI to be able to predict those things based on the development of the embryo. The research, it's not 100% yet. It's not something that people are using in practice yet, because we're not seeing that the AI is better than we are at this point. But I do think it will get there at some point.
Wow.
For sure.
Okay.
That's very interesting.
Okay. And since we were talking a little about freezing, I want to ask another one. When you go to thaw frozen embryos, can you I know it's going to be different for everyone, but can you kind of give us a percentage of the ones that make it through thaw? Like 50% of people's make it through thaw?
This is actually pretty equal across the board, and it's not really patient specific. So it is more practice specific, but in general, most practices have a 98% survival rate. Yeah, they survive the freezing process very well. Yeah, they do. And that's why we've changed to this new. So back in the day, they used to do slow freezing.
I was back in the day.
Slow freezing where they'd be in a vial. So instead of something like this, they'd be in like a vial, and they would seed them. And so they would put stuff in, and they would do a slow freezer, and the survival rates weren't as good, probably 80 to 85%. Now it's like 98%. It's very rare that we have an embryo not survive the thawing process. And oftentimes, if it doesn't, it's likely because the embryo was like very borderline quality. So it's very unlikely. I mean, I don't see it very often. It's very rare. I've seen it in my career like a handful of times.
That's amazing.
We're going to stay on this little track, but now we're going to go to the unfreezing, right? So when it's time for a transfer, what is that unfreezing process like? How long do you, how long
is it unfrozen before transfer? I think maybe is what she's trying to say.
And so we actually call this warming. So we have vitrification, which is like the freezing part, and then warming, which is like the thawing part. And they warm almost immediately, because the amount of media on this is so tiny. We move it immediately from liquid nitrogen into media, and it warms right away. Now, it takes a little time for it to kind of start the process of converting energy and taking in nutrients and things like that, but it's essentially warmed like right away. The process for us from in the liquid nitrogen to warmed and in a culture dish is like 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So literally being done on day of transfer, or
it's done the morning of.
Okay.
So it's done the morning of transfer. Depending, each practice has a protocol on how much time they want between when the embryo is warmed and when the transfer is. Most of the time, it's like 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours.
I was going to say, so I've heard of 2 hours. So I was like 10 minutes. What are you talking about? Okay.
Yeah. So the actual process only takes 10 minutes, but we're doing it like 2 hours before the transfer.
Okay.
Yeah. So the process is really quick, and there's actually some new protocols coming out that we're calling like ultra rapid warming, and the process that we do takes 2 minutes. Wow. So it actually takes more time to like set up the paperwork and like set up all the pictures than it does to actually do it. It does not take that long. That's a lot of things in the lab. The paperwork takes longer, and the setup takes longer than the actual procedure.
Crazy.
Alease, I was a surrogate like 22 years ago. And so when they graded those eggs, 1, 2s, 3s, 4s, like that's what
I can go into that if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah, so those were likely day 3 embryos.
They were day 3.
Blastocysts, yes.
100%.
So on day 3, we don't have an ICM or a trophectoderm yet, or even an expansion, because they don't start to push out on the zona until they've gotten to blastocyst stage, which is day 5, 6, and 7.
Okay. Okay.
So on day 3, we're looking at the number of cells. We're wanting to see 6 to 8 to 10 cells, and we can count the cells individually. We're looking for symmetry, the number of cells, fragmentation, like I said. So the embryos will give off little bits of cells with abnormal DNA in them. So we don't want to see a lot of that. We want to see normal symmetry, and we want to see a good number of cells.
Okay.
So with day 3 grading, a 1 is good, and then like a 3 or 4 is lower on the scale. So 1 is best, like 4 is the lowest quality. So, and then back then, they probably also transferred more than 1 embryo. So they'll do 2, maybe 3. Yeah,
4.
Yep. That's
They
not
were
common.
all number 4s, and we put 4 in. And lo and
That's
behold,
probably why they did 4.
we had triplets.
Oh my God.
Go figure. Right, I know.
Wait, did you carry triplets?
I did.
Yeah. Mom, how old did they just turn?
22.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
crazy.
really crazy. Wow. Yeah. So typically the lower the quality of the embryo, the more they would do.
Yeah. And now that's like unheard of. Like it's one and done. Usually, you're like, oh, wait.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times where this misconception of like IVF is like going to bring all these multiples, because back in the day we had to transfer more than 1.
Yeah.
Because
the science wasn't there.
The science wasn't there. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. No,
Crazy.
are you kidding me? When I did my first transfer, this woman freaked me out. She's like, they only transferred 1. How dare they only transfer 1? And I'm like freaking out that it's not going to take. She's like, they should have transferred 2 or 3. And I'm like,
I know. Right.
Yeah.
And it took
the guidelines are different now. Yeah. Because we can culture them.
Yeah.
The other thing is we didn't have the science to be able to culture them any longer than day 3.
Right.
So now that we can, we do see that there is a drop off between day 3 and day 5. So all the day 3s are not going to make it to day 5. That is really when the whole genome takes over in terms of development. So we see a lot of arrest in development between day 3 and day 5. And that's because the whole genome kind of takes over in terms of development. Up until day 3, it's the eggs DNA.
Interesting.
Okay. So there's technically, I mean, in my head, maybe I'm wrong, but these are the 3 things that I've heard. There's a fresh, there's 3-day, and there's 5. So am I wrong?
So those all could be fresh technically.
Oh, okay.
So you can do a day 3 transfer.
Okay.
Or a day 5 transfer, fresh or frozen for either. Most of the time now we're culturing to day 5. Like there's only some clinics and some instances where people will do a transfer or freeze on day 3.
Okay.
The breakthrough rates are lower, the survival rates aren't as good. So oftentimes that's why we started to culture day 5.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
So there's no things that are like, oh, we're pulling eggs today and also like it's not that fresh.
Not eggs. We could pull, blastocysts and thaw them and transfer them in the same day, but a patient is planned for that. Like they know what, like we schedule it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Scheduling it for a specific day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
This is, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I could talk to you for hours.
You spend a lot of time with a microscope, don't you? You're like,
I do. I'm starting to get some back issues.
Oh, I was going to talk about your eyes, back issues.
Really? So I do have contacts, but I've always had contacts. I don't really have any eye issues that I think are related to the microscope. For me, it's a posture thing. So I'm fairly tall. I'm 5'8". So if either the stool won't get low enough, so I'm like hunched over, or the stool will get low enough, but the platform that the table that the microscope is on is too high, so my arms are like this. So looking straight like this, or my shoulders are down and I'm like hunched over. But that's a pretty common thing. Ergonomics are really important for embryologists because so many leave the field because of back pain.
Oh, I bet.
It's really unfortunate. Yeah.
Oh, it's too bad. You would think they could develop some type of adjustable table platform. Yeah, you would think.
I think the problem with stuff like that is the microscopes. I'm giving you all the nitty-gritty. I don't think I've told you. I don't know if anybody knows this, like who's on embryologist. The microscopes are on anti-vibration tables. And that is so that when we're doing procedures, because they're so small, if there's vibration, we can't hold things appropriately or see things appropriately and make sure we're in the right plane. So they're on anti-vibration tables, and I don't know if there was adjustment, if it would continue.
Right. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Look
Yeah.
at that.
Okay, I have a really bizarre question because all that I'm thinking, because like the moment that we started talking, I'm like, oh, she looks through microscopes. And I just keep going back to the episode in Grey's Anatomy where Christina Yang, I don't know if you watched that, but Christina Yang, and like she has to like put the pen directly on the nose of like a dollar bill of like a president through a microscope. So my question is looking through a microscope so like wildly different because
what we do
your
is harder
perception.
than that. I don't remember the episode, but
Okay.
what we're working with is even smaller than a pen and a dollar. Oh, easily.
Yeah, but like your perception, like how long did it take for you to like get used to like, oh, like I don't actually have to go to that far to the right or that far to the left? Like,
Oh, it does take a little bit to learn how to use the micro manipulators. It depends on
okay.
what kind of microscope we're using. So the microscopes we use to do injections, which is ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injections, when we're putting the sperm directly into the egg, and when
Okay.
we're doing biopsy for PGT, those are done on a different microscope than when we're just handling eggs and embryos or doing like setting up dishes, moving them from dishes. Those are different microscopes. So the microscopes that we use for micro manipulation for ICSI and biopsy are more difficult to use because you're looking at a microscope but have to use
Something else.
handles when you're not looking at the handles, you're looking at the microscope. You're using like joysticks and different things to manipulate needles that go into the microscope. So it does take a little bit of time to like get used to that.
Sure.
But once you've done it, like it's muscle memory. Like I don't know.
I was just gonna say it's muscle memory. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And you can troubleshoot really easy. Like once you've been doing it for a while, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
How long have you been an embryologist? Like,
So I've been in the field over 6 years now. I've been an embryologist for like 4.5, something like that. I was in andrology for a while, which is sperm, hormone testing. Like I was doing a lot of semen analyses, preps for IUIs, things like that. I actually really enjoy that. I don't mind it. Like now, like there are a lot of embryologists who hate going to andrology. They feel like it's like a demotion, and I'm like, I don't mind. I get paid the same. If I have to rotate through, who cares? It's fun. Like it's like a little less pressure.
Yeah.
You're not like it's I don't know. The sperm are fun. They're fun to look at under the microscope. I don't know. I don't mind it.
Yeah.
That would be super fun. Okay, I'm gonna go to our questions that my mom wrote down. What I don't know. Okay, because we had talked about different embryologists, right? So does each clinic, are you with like one clinic? I guess that's my question. Or are you with like multiple clinics?
So I am a little different than the average embryologist. So most embryologists are at one practice and one practice only. They work with the same they work with the same embryologist every day, same equipment, same physicians. They're at a practice. I am a per diem embryologist, which is similar to travel nursing. So I'm contracted. So I cut like there are clinics who batch their cycles, meaning patients are put on birth control for timing, and all patients are retrieved within the same week. So then they hire me. Like if they're a smaller practice and like they don't want to hire a full-time embryologist the whole time because they don't need me for that 1 week.
Right.
But I come in for that 1 week, do the procedures, and then I go somewhere else. I also will cover for people on maternity leave, on vacation, over the holidays, like things like that. There are per diem embryologists. Like there are people just do that. But I would say majority of embryologists are at a practice full-time.
Okay.
So if I'm an IP and I'm, looking around and trying to figure out which clinic to go to, the embryologist obviously plays also a huge part in that, right? So are embryologists like, do IPs get to talk to embryologists or like kind of like?
Most of the time we're very behind the scenes, but that doesn't mean there aren't things you can look into to determine if you have a good quality lab. And this is something I talk about a lot because physicians are fantastic and are very important, but it is a combination deal here. So you can have a great physician and a horrible lab and you're not going to have a good
You're right.
experience, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to consider both. And I actually have a free guide on this. I'm choosing a practice, and it goes into the lab stuff. It's on my website. I'll have to send you guys the link to it.
Yeah, and I'll put it in
It's
the show
also
notes.
like in the link of my Instagram bio if anyone's like ever in there. It's free. You can take a look at it. It probably needs to be
Nice.
updated, but it's pretty solid. I think I went into pretty good detail about the lab specifically. So for
Okay.
me, the big thing, the first thing you should consider is accreditation.
Mm.
I mentioned before, accreditation is not mandatory, so it's not required. So
Wow.
CAP accreditation is the most common, but not the only accreditation. So you want to make sure your lab is accredited by someone, because
Yeah.
that is the only thing, those are the only things that have any sort of standard. So if you are CAP accredited, you have to meet certain standards in your lab. When
Okay.
it comes to um, um, the training of your embryologist, when it comes to your witnessing, how you do chain of custody for samples, labeling, all of those things,
Wow.
air handling. I mean, literally top to bottom, you have to meet certain requirements. There are on-site inspections every 2 years and interim virtual inspections every year. So you want to have an accreditation. There's another accrediting body, but I can't remember the name of it because it's not one that I have ever worked with. CAP is the most common.
Okay.
College of American Pathologists. And
Okay.
most clinics have that on their website somewhere. Our lab is CAP accredited, or you'll see it in the clinic on a poster or something like that. That also means that embryologists have to do continuing education. If you are CAP accredited, you have to do proficiency testing twice a year. Your testing in your lab has to match the testing. There's like a scale. You have to be within a certain deviation of majority of practices in the country. All clinics do have to report, all labs do have to report their cycles to the FDA. And if you are CAP accredited, you can use SART to do that, SART.org. And SART will compile all the data for you, and they send it to the FDA, but they also make it available to the public. So you can go to SART.org, type in your
Oh.
practice. If your practice is on there, one, that means they're CAP accredited.
Okay.
And see lots of statistics. Now, I always say to take this with a grain of salt, because you don't know how they're calculating all of these numbers. And there's a lot of nuanced things that you learn as an embryologist that they're like, oh, that's weird that they calculate it like that. Take it with a grain of salt, but oftentimes you can look at pregnancy rates for patients 30 to 32 or 40 to 45, or how many patients do they have that had multiples, how many did use donor egg, all of these things. You can also see how many cycles they reported for that year. It's typically a couple years behind, so you're probably looking at like 2021, 2022 now. But you can see their reporting status. So if you're not reporting correctly, you can see that on SART. We have
Oh.
effective report, meaning that we have to report it to SART when the patient starts their cycle. So if you don't report it timely, then you get a little ding for that, because they don't want people to lie about what happened in the cycle, or how many cycles they're doing, or how many cycles get canceled, or things like that. So you have to start reporting on the day that the patient starts their meds, and then we have to enter in like data from the embryology lab. How many fertilized? How many like made it to blast? And like, are they good? Are they fair? Like, they do it for gestational carriers as well. We have to put in gestational carrier cycles,
Wow.
donor cycles. We have to put in IUI cycle. We have to put in everything.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so SART is a great resource.
Yeah.
I mentioned that in the guide. I also talk about ways to kind of learn more about SART. Like I said, there is some things they should take with a grain of salt. But in general, it's not a bad place to look. It also never hurts to, I always suggest people think about these things before they go in for a consultation, because when you go in for a consult, there's a lot of information you're getting, and you may not think about these things before you get in. And a lot of people are like, okay, this is a fertility specialist, that's good. And it takes them 2 or 3 cycles to realize this is not a good practice. And then you've spent 50 grand there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So think about, like, have a conversation with your partner, with a friend, bring someone with you who can have a different experience, because you're only catching half the information. They're catching the other half. Come with notes, come with questions. I think consults are only so long, but if you feel like you haven't had your questions answered, I'd schedule another one. Don't be afraid to get a second opinion. The other thing that you can, they may not have this information, but Most labs also keep stats on their embryologists. So we know who's the best at ICSI in the lab, or who has the best like FET thaw rate. Like we know all of that because we keep track of it because it's important to know. We want everyone to be consistent.
Yeah.
So everyone's not gonna be good at everything. Like I had a great FERT rate, you know, but this person has a better whatever. So you know, they keep up with that. And if they get below a certain threshold, then okay, we need to start talking about remedial training for this specific embryologist. Or everyone across the board in this past quarter had all of these things dip. That's unusual. Maybe we should look at, you know, testing our microscope, or maybe we should look into our media. Maybe it's an outside factor that's having an impact. So we keep up with all of that, and they probably won't share that with you because oftentimes we check it, but like it's not something like we know off the top of our head all the time because it changes, right? But
Right.
asking, what are some of the things that you do to ensure your embryologists are all well trained? You know, if you're concerned about witnessing, that's always something that people have a lot of questions about. How are you going to be sure that my embryos are my embryos?
Right.
Am I
Yeah.
ask them how they do it. There's ways to do it. Do you label everything? Do you have two people witness? Do they have an electronic witnessing system? How do they store their embryos? Are they on site? Are they off site? Is that a cost incurred to me? What happens if I move? All of these things. How do you do consenting? Are you automatically going to discard my abnormal embryos? Because some practices do that. Or do I have to tell you that they need to be discarded? Or can I decide if I want them to be discarded? What do I value in a practice? Am I on a budget and I don't need as much handholding because I've done this 3 times. I want a good value. I want to get in and get out. Or do I need a lot of handholding? Do I have a special case? I don't just have tubal factor. I've got stage 4 endo. We've got male factor. I'm missing a tube. I need someone who has done this multiple times. So there's so many things to think about.
Lot.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, what do you value? Think about your other experiences in healthcare. It doesn't have to be fertility. Think about your OBGYN, think about your eye doctor, think about all these things. What did you like and what did you not like? Are you someone who's like, if I have to deal with another horrible billing person, I can't take it?
Oh, for real.
Think about that. How do you do billing? Who do I get information from? Am I assigned to a nurse? Is it a nurse team? Am I going to get a call from a nurse? Am I going to get a call from an embryologist? Do they call me? Do they email me? Literally, is there a portal? How does it work? There's so many things to consider.
Much.
Yes.
I know I'm going on and on, but it's because we don't think about it.
No, for sure.
Yeah. You don't, because when you think of, I hate to say this, but you think of the bare minimum. You think of like, who's good? Who do I click with? Okay, the IVF doctor sounds great. Like we're gonna go. Like on it. Like honestly, that's kind of how I thought that was done. Like I would have never
Like, can I
imagined.
afford it? Does my insurance cover it at this practice?
Right.
Yeah, like that. I would have never gone into that depth. So it makes a lot of
Great
sense.
information.
It definitely.
It's great
it's
information.
I feel like if you're going to be spending a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
Going there every other day or every couple days. Are they close? You know, and you're spending so much money and emotional investment. You're investing your time, you're investing your money. It's a strain on your finances, on your relationships, on your time. And so I think it's an important thing to think about because you are this is a hefty investment on all sides. And I think it's really important to think about these things. And the other thing is nobody wants to be there. Like they want to be pregnant 2 years before they even made it to the practice. So you want to have a good experience because you're already coming in a place of, I don't want to be here. And I don't blame you for that.
Yeah.
100%. Exactly. Wow. I want to ask a question. It happened a while ago, but I wanted to ask about this. What state was it?
Where the embryos got.
Yeah. I'm sure you heard about that, where the embryos got.
Was it California?
I thought it was Alabama.
Alabama, because it also triggered a lot of political issues, like banning IVF and things like that. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a lot of information on how it happened, but based off of what you're saying, like their embryos or like where you have worked, they're like in a secure place.
Yeah, so I know enough to know about what happened. So I actually work at a practice that's like 30 minutes from where this happened.
Oh, okay.
I won't go into detail, like names right there, but you could find it if you Googled it.
Okay.
You can find the practice where it happened at this point.
For sure.
So essentially this fertility clinic was in a hospital or in a medical building where there are other patients there.
Yes.
So most practices, their embryos are stored in a dewar, which is a large tank, and then that tank is often locked or secured in some way, and then it's in another room that's secured. So this practice had their tank room, their cryo room, that's what we call it, where everything is stored, not secured. So it wasn't locked. It wasn't, it was something that you could get into without a badge, without a thumbprint, without a keypad, you know, or without a key. And so this was not a fertility patient. This was another patient who came in, was playing around with stuff, didn't know what they were doing. And then essentially when you take stuff out of liquid nitrogen, like I said, they thaw immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
They're not immediately put into media or constantly held in liquid nitrogen. They're done right away, immediately. So that's what happened there. I mean, there's definitely concern with making sure things are locked appropriately, which is not a bad question to ask. How are your tanks monitored?
Yeah.
It's not just does someone have access to them?
Yeah.
It's
Like
how are they monitored?
safe?
Because what if something happens? The tank malfunctions in the middle of the night. Does
Right.
someone know? And
Power
at this
goes out. Is there a generator? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Right.
at this point, CAP, like I said, requires all of those things. So if they're
Okay.
Oh,
that
look at
gives you
that.
reassurance
Okay.
Oh,
that
cool.
these things
Okay.
are being put into place properly, because
Big deal.
CAP requires you to have active monitoring. So if
What?
the temperature drops below a certain you know, or actually goes above a certain temperature, or if the weight changes, or there's frost that starts to leak from the top, someone is called, and like
Okay.
you to go check it and make sure everything's okay. You have to have written emergency plans, and like, what are you going to do
Whoa.
in the event of a hurricane?
That's
Or like, I'm
great.
telling you, like, there is
Good.
binders and binders full of stuff like for this.
Wow.
But it never hurts to ask, like, how do you guys monitor your tanks? Do you store on site? That's the other thing,
Yeah.
because you can have tanks here that are monitored, but majority of patients get sent off to a cryo storage facility. A lot of people are doing that now because storage is a very frustrating, and it's a big logistical problem for a lot of practices, because I've been at practices that have 2 tanks or 7 tanks for all of their patients. I've been at practices that have 60 tanks that they have to measure, fill, maintenance, inventory
Wow.
weekly. And so
Wow.
they get to the point where they're like, we literally don't have any more space. We can't even validate tanks fast enough. We have to find something else. And so there are companies out there that is their whole job. They store embryos, they inventory them. That's what they do. And that is their whole thing. ReproTech is one, CryoFuture is another, Tomorrow Life Sciences is the third that I know of. That's the fairly large, big 3. And so that's what they do.
Yeah.
Especially for patients who are cryopreservation, like fertility preservation. So like me, if I'm freezing my eggs, I'm not going to use them right now. So they don't need to be stored on site. They can be stored somewhere else. And then when I'm ready to use them, I ship them to whatever practice I'm going to be using them at. Patients who are family complete, but not ready to make a disposition on their embryos, I'm going to continue to store them for a little bit. Let's send them somewhere else.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Or I'm pregnant now, so I'm not going to be doing a transfer anytime soon. Let's send them off for the next year. That sort of thing. So there's so many things.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, I mean, my understanding, like when eggs or when embryos are frozen, there's no excuse me if I'm using the wrong term here, expiration date for them, right? Like as long as they're stored correctly, they should be able to last forever.
That is correct. So I think so far the oldest documented embryo, it's like 30 years. Like the patient was younger than the embryo, which was crazy. But yeah, they can essentially be frozen indefinitely. Like you said, barring no malfunctions or hurricanes or anything crazy.
Yeah.
They can be stored indefinitely and have the same survival rate and chance of pregnancy as when they were frozen. So it doesn't does not decrease the chance of pregnancy. They stay frozen in time.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, because that was information that was misinformation for me then, because I thought the longer that an embryo was frozen, the less likely the outcome.
Oh,
that's
not
true.
with today's science, apparently. Right?
That
Amazing.
is awesome.
So how often do you see, and I know this isn't even on the questions, but how often do you see fresh transfers versus frozen? Frozen's like the higher number, right?
So I get this question a lot. Is fresh better? Is frozen better? So I think there are some pros and cons to both. If you are doing PGT testing, you're doing frozen, unless you're going to do a fresh transfer on one and then do PGT on the rest, which you can do. But there are certain patients that are good candidates for fresh transfer. And this starts to get into medical stuff. So I just like to say, I'm not a physician. This is not medical advice. Always talk to your physician about any of these decisions. Always. I am not a doctor. So keep in mind, our goal for retrieval is eggs. We're trying to get as many eggs as we can. We want them to be mature. We're not always focused on the uterine lining. So there are certain protocols where we can have the best of both worlds. We're going to get a good amount of eggs and they're going to be mature and we're not going to overstimulate them or anything. And the lining is going to stay intact. There are other times though, where we have to be aggressive with stimulation protocols and we're not going to focus on the lining. And so when we're doing the retrieval and they do a scan, or they do a scan a couple days later to see if they're a candidate for a fresh transfer, lining doesn't look good, or maybe there's fluid still remaining from the retrieval, and we're going to cancel a fresh transfer and do a frozen. The other thing I like, people to think about and talk to their physician about is, this is a lot on your body. You've now injected yourself for 10, 12 days with medication. You've undergone a procedure. Not that it decreases. So I say this not because it decreases the chance of pregnancy. Research shows fresh and frozen transfers have about the same pregnancy rate. It's more for, do you feel like your body is ready? Are you ready physically, emotionally, financially to do this? Do you want to take a break, give your body a break, spend a little bit more time focusing solely on preparing your body for a transfer versus preparing your body for a retrieval? And you may need some time to save some money. So I think there are some things to think about that aren't necessarily medical when you're making this decision with your physician, but there are medical considerations, but I think there are also like other considerations to think about. Like, you've just done a retrieval 5 days ago. Like the retrieval day is day 0 and we do a transfer on day 5. So you're like a couple days, it's a few days later. And so it's like, it could just be hard on you. You're still recovering from the retrieval. You may not feel that great. As much as people love to say, oh, you're going to feel much better after your retrieval. People don't. Like, you still feel kind of gross. You're still bloated. You may have some spotting, things like that. So, you may just say, hey, I want to take a little break. I need to rest. It's been a stressful few weeks. I was hopped up on hormones. I want rest. And now I want to take some time and come back to a transfer. But our research is showing us similar pregnancy rates. So it's not something that necessarily impacts that if you're a patient that doesn't have a specific medical indication to do one or the other.
Okay. Wow. Science is amazing.
This is just so phenomenal. You are phenomenal. Like, your knowledge is
love
like
talking about this stuff.
We can tell. This is like,
I love it.
You probably worked all day and then you hopped on here and you're like,
I did work all day. I'm not gonna lie. I got home like 15 minutes before we jumped on. I'm like,
oh my God, I'm so sorry.
I'm guessing you guys are on the West Coast because I'm on the.
We are.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, you're on the East Coast? Oh my God, it's late where you are.
I picked this. I mean, it was this or a weekend. I was like, oh, I'll do it on the evening.
I know. I'm so sorry. No, this is truly fantastic. Honestly, I know a lot of surrogates and IPs are going to take so much away from this. The one thing that I'm going to have embedded in my brain and I will constantly listen to is the grading, because I'm like, nope, I need to understand this like in full, like I do.
It makes sense.
But it makes perfect sense.
You broke it down beautifully. I love it.
Because when people say they have a double A, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, people get really hung up on the grading. So I get questions about, like, is my poor quality embryo, does that mean it's not normal? Does that mean it's not going to implant? So the lower quality embryos have a higher likelihood of being abnormal and a slightly lower pregnancy rate, but it's not, we can't say your AA is going to be normal.
Right, it's going to work.
So we can say it on the back way, but we can't say it like the inverse way. We can't say, oh, this is a CC, so it's not going to implant, it's going to be abnormal. Like, that's not always the case. I see there are embryos, I'm like, this is not going to make a baby. And they do.
And then
Or
yeah.
the previous embryo, and I'm like, this is going to be normal, cut and dry, and it comes back abnormal. So we, like I said, like we can't see that.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's not enough of a correlation to say good quality embryos, pregnant, normal, and poor quality embryos, not pregnant, abnormal. Like that's
Right.
not enough to say that.
So many things
Can-
have to align, you know, that the host, the uterus, whether it be a surrogate or the person who donated the eggs, what have you.
But the other
Everything has
thing is
to
the
align.
most common cause of implantation failure or miscarriage is the embryo.
Well, yes, thank you for saying that. I really
Yes.
appreciate that.
That's
Because
a
a
big deal.
lot,
It's,
yeah.
I mean, while
Big deal.
people look at the uterus and they're doing testing, the most common reason is the embryo, even with a genetically normal embryo. Because like I said, PGT can't test for everything.
Right.
There could be a really small genetic abnormality, genetic mutation that it's not going to implant. It wasn't severe enough to create an issue, and so it made it a blast, but it's severe enough to not make it past that. And so the embryo is the most common cause.
Can I ask one more question because it just popped into my head?
Yeah.
Can you explain what a freaking mosaic embryo is?
Yes. Okay. So there have been a lot of issues as the testing has gotten better, and now we can detect these.
Okay.
And that has brought to the forefront some of the limitations that we have with testing. Okay. So again, we don't know if it's representative of the whole embryo, but essentially mosaicism is we are testing 5 to 7 cells from the embryo. Some of them are normal, some of them are abnormal. And so when we run the testing, it comes back that it's not a full, like, it's hard to explain, but it's very confusing. I'm not gonna lie. When you look at the actual report, I may be able to like point it out to you, but essentially some of the cells are normal and some of the cells are abnormal. So we can't say for sure that this is a normal embryo or an abnormal embryo. It's somewhere in the middle, but also there is testing error with mosaic with some of the testing platforms. So some of it could be noise. It's really a lot in depth. So I would definitely recommend talking to a genetic counselor. We also, when we first started figuring out mosaicism was a thing, we're like, oh, we shouldn't transfer these because
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. Do you transfer them?
Research is showing that a lot of these mosaic embryos are making babies.
Yes, they are. That's why I asked. I know surrogates. And
yes, and they're I'm gonna give a shout out. I literally send people to her all the time. She's fantastic. So Megan from DNAID, DNAIDE on Instagram, fantastic. She has a lot of great resources on mosaicism. She actually does a mosaicism workshop a couple times a year. It is worth every penny. She is very smart and very great. She's fantastic at explaining complex topics. Highly recommend. She's Canadian, but can see patients in certain states. She's getting licensed in certain states. She can see patients. She talks a lot about mosaicism. She's got lots of videos on mosaicism, and in general, they are making babies. They're making babies. And talk to your doctor before you decide what you want to do with them, whether transfer them, discard them, whatever talk to someone about, talk to your doctor, talk to a genetic counselor about what this really means in terms of pregnancy. I know a lot of people who have very normal, like they got pregnant, normal baby, normal pregnancy, totally everything was normal. And it's very interesting. We're learning a lot. The other thing with that I was going to mention, mosaicism is actually the threshold. So like there's low mosaicism, high mosaicism. That's set by each different testing lab. So some labs will say 30% mosaicism is going to actually, 30% of cells abnormal, we're going to actually call normal, a normal embryo. 50% to 50% we're going to call low mosaic. And 50% to 70% we're going to call high mosaic. 70% and above we're going to call abnormal. And those change.
That makes sense.
Mosaic at one lab and it's actually normal somewhere else.
That's interesting.
And they set those themselves.
Okay.
Okay, that's why they can fluctuate.
Interesting. That is interesting because surrogates get a little freaked out when they hear it might be a mosaic embryo transfer, and there's like, oh God, they freak out. But
we don't know what it is.
Right.
So that really I would definitely And like I do feel like if you're gonna be a surrogate or gestational carrier, they should be educating you on that stuff too.
You
So I think
nailed it. Yeah, they should.
Yeah.
Talking to a
Yeah.
genetic counselor about that as well, especially if you're going to be carrying a pregnancy. I think that's a conversation for like you, the IP, and the genetic counselor. Not that you necessarily are going to be making the decision, but for you to
Yeah.
know
Just to
what
become
that means.
informed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what
Education
these
is helpful.
podcasts do. They kind
Right.
of put the little
Yeah.
bug in our ears and our heads and go, oh, I should ask that next time I do it, or I
Yeah.
should. Yeah. So it's super helpful. God, all of this was phenomenal.
I know.
Oh,
Where can people follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me at Alease the Embryologist on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. I've got aleaseembryologist.com. You can send me an email. You can send me a DM. I cannot give medical advice.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
fair.
always preface that. But if you have general questions like stuff like this, I answer
Oh,
DMs every day. Like
Oh my
it may
gosh.
take me a couple days to get to it if I'm like super
Sure.
busy in the lab or
Yeah.
like traveling or something. But I always get back to people. I'm happy to answer questions. And if I don't know, I will just say I don't know. You should check out X, Y, and Z person, or you should talk to your
Great.
doctor. Like,
wow.
I'm not about spreading misinformation or talking about
Right.
things I'm not
No.
about. So if I don't know, I will just tell you.
That's
Oh my
awesome.
God. This is like,
Yeah, this was
honestly,
ridiculously informative. Yeah.
this is like top, this is like my top 3 favorite conversations that we've had.
Yep. 100%. Yep. When I
This
was finding you and I was like going, okay, what should we ask? I'm like, but she's gonna probably tell us. But I
I
don't need
know.
to ask her questions. She's
We
just
don't know
gonna
what to
tell us.
ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just go on and on. And
My
there's so many
gosh.
things to get into.
There are so many things. I would love to have another conversation one day and like just
But-
have you
Yeah,
run
we
it
could
and be like,
definitely do a part 2.
Yeah.
I'm always down for a part 2 because we didn't even get into like insemination or like retrievals, different types of egg maturity, any of that.
there's gonna be a part 2. Everyone stay tuned because there's just
we'll do
so
a part 2.
much. It's so
Yeah.
hard to fit everything into an hour.
And we'll
Yeah.
see what type of reaction we get from this. And people may go, well, can we talk about
I
this?
was
And
just
maybe
gonna
we'll
say,
have a list.
For sure.
Yeah.
They'll ask some questions after listening to this, and then I can follow up and answer those
For
questions.
sure.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Thank you
And thank
so
you,
much.
ladies, for telling us to reach out to us.
Yes. And go eat some
Thank
dinner,
you
you
guys
poor
who
thing.
requested me.
Oh my gosh.
Shout out
For
to
real.
you.
For real. Oh my gosh. Well,
That's
thank you
awesome.
so much. I know it's so
Thank
late where
you.
you are.
Yes.
Yeah,
And you
no
had a
worries.
long
I
day.
had the best time. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said, I love doing this stuff. It's so fun. I could talk about this all day. I do talk about it all day if you've seen my page because I just can't help myself.
I love it.
But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
I
won't.
won't. Thank you so much.
Gosh, it's beautiful.
Have a great evening.
Yes.
Bye, you too.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh my gosh.
Wow. Wow. My mind is blown. And not on a lot of these podcasts does my mind get blown. That was so phenomenal.
I want to go and hang out with her and like have coffee and just talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Like
And
this.
what people don't really understand, she's East Coast, so she worked the whole day.
Yeah.
It's like, gosh, almost 9 o'clock her time, and she is still full of energy. Still
Oh my God.
amazing.
Oh my God. Just
Thank
thank you. I'm excited.
Thank you,
I'm
thank you, thank you.
excited. And I can't wait to do another conversation.
Yeah, we will do part 2.
We suck, Mom. We did not get into we didn't get past the freezing.
But here's the thing. I think all that information is what many of our listeners really want.
I know.
Really want. And then
I know.
we'll go into the more depths in part 2 when she has time. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much, Alease. Oh my gosh. If anybody has any stories or questions that they would like to share, please feel free to reach out to us on Instagram at Stop.Sit.Surrogate. And this has been another episode of Stop.Sit.Surrogate with Kennedy and Ellen.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.